Welcome. This is the Living a Revenue Culture podcast. Today, we're going to focus on the revenue roadmap. And for those of you who haven't been with us before, the Living a Revenue Culture podcast is about helping people to understand how to combine people and business goals to create absolutely great companies. You are living a revenue culture at the point that you are maximizing profits because you first optimized your people. And you can't optimize your people unless you've created a context that will lead to maximum profit but encourages people's creativity, innovation, collaboration, and it minimizes chaos and friction. So today we're going to really focus on how do you create that context, and part of that context is what we call a revenue roadmap. And you've heard terms like a buyer journey and go-to-market and all kinds of different things. What we're going to show you today or talk to you about today is 40 years of research and what really happens when offers are going to market. And when you think about offers, got to remember, offers are like children. They're expensive and they take a lot of time. But you can never sell or buy a product or service until it's converted into an offer. I mean, minimally, you have to be able to tell somebody how much does it cost, where can I buy it, how do you take payment. Things like that are minimum. And for the work most of us do, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. There's, how do we deliver this? Is there a warranty to it? How do I get trained? Just all kinds of stuff. Does it integrate with other products or services? So remember, offers are going to travel this revenue roadmap. So let's make this as simple as we possibly can so that it's easy for you to go apply and take advantage of. The revenue roadmap has 6 primary things to think about. And we describe them, everything's got to have an acronym. So this acronym is IQSCD. That stands for investigate, qualify, solidify, contract, and deliver. And if you think about a roadmap where the idea is the buyer wants to acquire something that you'd like to sell them, and both of you want value on the other side of that, these steps will kind of make sense to you. So clear your thinking and imagine a scenario where as you are taking your product or service offer to the market, that you start recognizing that there are, in today's internet world, there are infinitely more buyers out there for you to sell to, someplace in the world. Then you have resources to go talk to them in person, send them an email, or even know they exist. And so start with a recognition that there's an infinite number of suspects that could become prospects, and they could become qualified leads, and they could become clients or customers or buyers, whatever you want to call them, and you could deliver something to them. So the first step in that fact that there's an infinite number of people out there is investigate. And if this was 30 years ago, you as a seller would be investigating buyers. You'd be out buying a list, or if you even remember what yellow pages are, you'd get the yellow pages out and you'd start to look and you'd try and find who is it out there that, I can delight by bringing them a new offer. But in today's world, it's really the other way around. The buyers are out there wondering, how do I solve this problem? Is there somebody who's already done this? Or if I know somebody's done it, who can I trust? Who do I know out there that can do this and do it in a way that I'm going to be delighted when we're done? And so the investigate is really that first endeavor into trying to find a way to match a buyer who has a problem with a seller who has an ideal solution. And today's investigation is often predominantly is in a digital format of some way, a virtual, digital. It can be social media, it can be websites, it can be blogs, it can be webinars. But typically the sellers are out looking, or the buyers are out looking for those sellers who have an ideal solution that really meets all of the requirements to make the buyer's world better. Now, that's step one. So I is investigate. Most of the time, it's the buyer investigating who out there can solve their problem. Occasionally, the seller will recognize there's a potential buyer, and they'll do the investigation and proactively go out and communicate to that potential buyer. But that's the small part of the market today. One of the things for those of you who are sellers to recognize is that you have no idea how many people out there are actually looking for you, but they couldn't find you. You weren't clear, you weren't present in their thinking, you weren't in the places where they were looking. And so there could be thousands, dozens, hundreds of people out there or companies out there looking for you, but you haven't made it easy to be found. So when we talk about the context of the roadmap, part of it is you've got to be easy to find. So when people are investigating to solve a problem, you've got to be found. And in one of our other podcasts, we talk about Bell Curve 2.0, which tells us how to be found, how to make sure you know what the ideal buyer for you is looking for, and you know how to get in front of them. But today, just recognize, investigate is about your context making it easy for ideal buyers to find you. And the next part of this, the second step on the roadmap, is early qualify. Early qualify means when they find you and they recognize that you claim you solve the problem that this buyer has, that you are giving them enough information that they can see that you really understand them, that the seller in you understands the buyer, and the buyer can see that the things you're working on match their world. So the early qualify is about once they've investigated and found you exist, and they didn't click on to the next web page, or they stayed in your webinar, or they met you at a conference and they wanted to keep talking, it's because they're qualifying you as a potential provider of an offer that will make their world better. So when you're building your context, the first thing you have to do is be found. And then once you're found, the magic is in getting the buyer to see that you understand them. They want to be in the picture that you're painting. If you're pitching, if you're telling them how wonderful you are, it's hard for them to see themselves in your picture. So part of this is you creating your story, your communication model from the buyer's frame of reference backwards, so that your ideal buyers, when they hear your stories, they experience your conversation, they see themselves in your stories. They're previewing their world based on the things you're talking about. So that second stage, first one's investigate, second one's early qualify, where the buyer's deciding you're worth another few minutes of time. The third step is what's called late qualify. Late qualify is where the buyer is now willing to invest time in actually talking to you. Now, talking today can be online chat, it can be text, it can be email, it can be phone calls, it can be Zoom calls, It can be face-to-face meetings in your office or their office. But it's where we're really going to explore each other. And the interesting thing about this late qualify is the buyer is looking for somebody to solve a problem that the buyer has not been able to solve until now, until they met you. And so if they're believing that you've solved this problem before and you have the capability to make their world better by solving this problem for them, as a seller, you have to recognize that, we've heard this myth that, do whatever the buyer asks, listen to the buyer and do what they want. Well, that's a myth, because if the buyer really has a problem they don't know how to solve, why would they be the ones driving the direction of this conversation? If you went to a doctor, you wouldn't tell the doctor how to diagnose you. So when you're in a situation where you're trying to solve a problem that you don't know how to solve as the buyer, it makes good sense that you're willing to listen and jointly decide where you're going to go, because the seller knows things you don't know. So the late qualify is really the opportunity for the buyer to decide this seller seems to know enough that they're going to make my world better by solving this problem that I don't know how to solve. On the seller side, the seller at this late qualify, they're qualifying the buyer. Of course, we all have heard, well, do they have any money? Are they going to do it now? That's real. You want to make sure people can afford it. But really what you want to make sure of is that you can solve the problem they came here to solve. And by solving it, you're creating enough value that they're going to be thrilled to pay you, because you're going to make their world that much better. So we investigated. We early qualified where the buyer was determining that you're worth talking to, and then late qualify is really where the buyer and the seller are in a human-to-human conversation, and there can be two humans on each side, but it's humans to humans, and the seller has decided that the problem the buyer came with, the buyer wants solved, the seller can absolutely positively solve, as long as everybody follows a process to make sure they get the outcome that both parties really want. A really happy buyer and a seller that gets compensated for their value. So how do you do that? So now you've done the late qualify. Both parties think that they're in the right place, talking to the right people about the right things. So as the seller, you have to take control, because you know things the buyer doesn't know, and you actually know how to solve this problem if everybody's willing to play together. Because the buyer has information, they have resources, they have a definition of the problem. And so as a seller, you've got to partner with them. You can't just come in and slam this thing down and say, here, look, it's wonderful, buy it, and you'll be happy. It's a partnership. And the partnership we call, you get to the partnership, you achieve the partnership by going through the next step, the fourth step on the roadmap, which is create a joint statement of work. You're really solidifying that what the buyer wants, the seller does, and that what the seller is going to deliver, the buyer's willing to pay for. It's kind of simple. So a joint statement of work process can take anything from 5 minutes to months. If you're selling very complex, industrial, technical kinds of products and services, this can take quite a while. If this is something simple, like you're going to Best Buy and you want a home theater system, they will do a joint statement of work process with you in 30 minutes. They'll ask questions about how big is the room, what are the acoustics,